welcome back. Last time I set out to see if it was possible to clear all of Book 1 with the Askr trio, and if you haven't seen that video, I highly suggest doing it. I can link it in the description if you want to go see that, but otherwise, it's not really important for saying the second one. In any case, I figured I may as well just go with Book 2 now because, you know, 2 comes after 1, so, you know, it's just steady progression. So, we're going to be seeing if it's possible to clear all of Book 2 with the Askr trio. Now, it was a bit harder in Book 1, mainly because I didn't really have that 4th unit that was, like, crazy good. And there were some maps that were just, like, downright unfair for certain characters. But because of the amount of accessible skills that we have in the game nowadays, it was a bit more leveraged in difficulty overall. And the same can honestly be said about this one because now we have Fjorm, who's a really, really good unit. And who will probably be carrying a majority of the maps, as you'll see in a bit. But yeah, before we get started, I'll go show off the kits real quick. Alphonse is still rocking his triple brazen set with dull close and attack smoke. I didn't feel like I needed to change that out, mainly because it was already really effective. I could have given him a triangle depth refine, but that would have made him prone to blue foes that target his defense, which is not what I wanted. Granted, his low speed is definitely going to be a big detriment simply because foes are getting stronger and stronger now. Initially in Book 1, the first 8 chapters didn't even have like all level 40 units, which made it easier to clear, but now that we started in Book 2, all the units start out at level 40, so they're going to be hitting a lot harder from the get-go. Of course, Sharena also has the same kit with Quick Riposte, Steady Stance 3, Attack Defense form. I could have given her another Attack Defense form in her A slot, but I didn't have a spare Karen to give out, so we're still rocking this set. The only unit that did change out of the 3 was Anna because her attack is a big detriment to the clearing of this book simply because 29 base isn't good at all and a lot of units are getting tankier. Her speed is still decent enough, but she does need to output a fair amount of damage and she's not really going to be killing reds anytime soon, so I figured we may as well just go with a triangle depth lance breaker set so she can at least secure blue kills. And then we have Fjorm, who basically came with everything in her remix. She has Mirror Stance 3, Shield Pulse, Drive Attack. Drive Attack is whatever. It's good for just supporting other allies, but it's not really going to be helping her at all. And then Steady Breath is just there so she can charge up Ice Mirror when she retaliates. But with her Lepter Refine granting extra stats and penalty neutralization, she ends up becoming quite bulky overall. And comparatively to the other 3, she's definitely leagues better, which is why she's going to end up being one of the main reasons why Book 2 is able to be cleared. In any case, these are the 4 units I'll be using, and we may as well just get started with Chapter 1, Part 1. The first chapter isn't all too bad, it's just a few generic enemies. You could just plonk a couple of them and they'll go down, no problem whatsoever. There's nothing really to write home about here. Basically, I could just whittle them down with Anna, have your own sweep, and have Alphonse take care of the rest, which is perfectly fine. And throughout the majority of the first chapter, it's just pretty much going to be that. Alphonse tanks a bunch of physical hits, and Fjorm tanks all the ranged hits. It's also interesting to note that a lot of the generics in Book 2 are ranged. Like, there are a good amount of physical units, but there are a lot of ranged units. And that will ramp up eventually in the later chapters. But for now, there are just a good amount of, like, ranged to physical. There's a good ratio of ranged to physical. So Fjorm is going to be useful right out of the gate. Alphonse, meanwhile, is just going to be our big physical tank who can pretty much just set up on all sorts of units. He can take on a bunch of physical units, he can take on ranged threats that target his defense. It's not really too bad. The only problem is going to be set up against blue units, but outside of that, the first 2 chapters aren't really that bad. Until we get to Chapter 2.5, where we have to defend against a unit that you can't kill. Now, I didn't think this would be too bad, mainly because Surtur only has 1 movement, so he's not really going to be going anywhere. And there's like a red and a ranged unit on the right side, so I could have Fjorm tank. But because Fjorm isn't fast enough to double, she isn't able to take out Levitain in the enemy phase. Meanwhile, Loki's just going to keep healing her, so it's going to be even more difficult for her to take out Levitain. So what we have to do basically is just bait them out and hopefully just be able to take her out in the enemy phase, but I keep failing to do so because Loki keeps healing. So it gets to a point where I'm just getting surrounded by units where it's not really too much, but I can see that a lot of my units are being chipped down. So I need to also make sure I'm not in range of Surtur so I don't end up dying to it. Because he also has his Surtur's Menace and yada yada yada. So that'll end up doing a good amount of damage to everybody. I figured that maybe I can tank Leviathan with other units, but the problem is that Loki also hits pretty hard because her PRF does grant Wrathful, so you can't exactly bait her out with other units, so she's going to end up doing a lot of damage there. So eventually I'm going to have to just keep baiting them down until I can take out Loki, and then have Fjorm tank the rest, because without her healing, Leviathan's just going to go down, which isn't a problem. And then Anna can pretty much just take down the Lance Cav, that's not really a big issue there. But at this point, I just have to worry about Surtur because of his 20 chip damage that he does before combat. That's a problem in its own. But it also does set up the Brazens for Alphonse, which is pretty nice. And then after that, you can pretty much just see where this is going. Alphonse is going to be able to tank the rest of the hits, provided that his special doesn't go off, which it doesn't because he is not able to double. And that's pretty much the only big hurdle for a while. After that, Fjorm is pretty much just going to be able to take a lot of the hits. There are a lot of ranged units. There are a lot of units that can't really go through her bulk. She is really bulky, all things considered. There is also this one map that's just full of defense tiles, which makes it even easier for her to tank everything. But outside of that, there really wasn't much of a challenge. There was this one map that had a time limit of 4 turns, which may seem daunting at first, but when you just throw Fjorm into the fray, and then have the bow archer just whittled down with Anna and Sharena, it's not really too bad. And then you can keep going with the next chapter where Alphonse is able to tank a lot of the physical foes on the right side, and Fjorm is able to take on a lot of the ranged threats on the left side, or the top left side. And we just keep getting to a point where, yeah, these units aren't really going to be doing much. The blue units are going to actually be doing a lot to Alphonse unless his Brazens are up, but the problem is, because he doesn't have his Brazens up initially, he's going to be taking a lot of damage. But then we get to this one chapter where we have to survive for 6 turns, which is pretty similar to the one we did in the earlier chapter. And I figured maybe we could just take out all these units because Surtur isn't here yet. But I was wrong. But because we were able to take out all sorts of units, it just basically became a game of chicken, and he was not able to reach us, and that was pretty much the match. We keep going. Fjorm is able to take on the majority of the ranged threats, and you can see that there are more ranged threats coming in, which is why Fjorm is just becoming a lot more useful in our party. There is also this one map where there are a bunch of reinforcements, which we don't really have to worry about because Fjorm can take the top side and the rest can take down the bottom side or whatever. But following that map, there was a map with dragons, which was actually a bit of a problem because outside of Fjorm, a majority of the units on the team do not have good res. And Anna's res doesn't really carry her nowadays because of the fact that they're just hitting much harder than they were in Book 2. But we just keep going, we keep tanking all these hits, and we can just continue on from there. There really isn't much to write home about on that end. They're just pretty much able to sweep because they can't really pierce through their damage, and Alphonse's damage with Brazen is really, really high. But after that, it's the same old, just take the hits, deal damage, yada yada yada. There really isn't anything that's outright crazy because Fjorm again is able to tank all the rage hits, so there isn't anything that's going to be threatening the Askr trio per se. But then you also have Alphonse who can tank all the physical hits, and then Sharena who can reliably double because of quick riposte. And the challenge doesn't really keep coming in because with the amount of skills that we have in the game now that are easily accessible, the difficulty spike comparatively from Book 1 to Book 2 is really minimal. Book 1 had a lot more stuff introduced, which made it a lot more difficult, and the amount of free units that we had at the time was a lot more limited. So for the next several parts, there isn't anything that's stopping Fjorm, Alphonse, Sharena, Anna's whatever, but she's not really going down anyway at the moment. So all's pretty good so far, right? But then we get to Chapter 7, Part 5, and this is where I run into another difficulty spike. I was already talking about how the difficulty wasn't exactly that bad comparatively to Book 1 at the time, simply because Book 1, again, introduces a lot of shit, and there's turn limits, and sometimes the units don't move, and yada yada yada. But we get to Chapter 7.5, and there's this Lance armor that Anna can't take down even with Lance Breaker and Triangle Death because Surtur is soaking the chills, which is a problem. But we keep making our way down in hopes that we can just take out all these units and avoid Surtur by all means. But the problem is that all these units are hitting way harder than they were before. Meaning that Alphonse, Fjorm, Sharena, Anna are going down really, really easily. Even against units like Finn, where Anna has no defense to call her own, which is a problem, especially, because she has Triangle Depth, so you would think maybe she could take a blue hit, but she really can't. And not reading Surtur's skills, I figured he had the same kit as before, but no, he comes with Bold Fighter now, which means that if he initiates on you, he's gonna get a bonfire off, which is a problem. So eventually I just keep making my way down in hopes that maybe I could just clear the map. Anna's not really gonna be doing anything here because her damage output is really bad now. But we get to a point where it's turn 5 and all these units are slowly making their way down. And my dumbass thought that maybe Alphonse can take the hit, but he can't. He gets debuffed and technically we cleared the map, but he died, so we had to redo it. Still, I tried the same strategy again. We just keep going gung-ho downwards as much as possible so we can avoid any sort of conflict with any of the reinforcements from the top and Surtur. So it actually works out pretty well because we don't have to worry about any of the reinforcements from that point because they aren't crowding us anymore. And by the time turns 4, 5, and 6 come around, we're basically able to finish up the rest of the reinforcements. Surtur keeps coming and he can't do anything, so we were able to win the map at that point. And then we just keep going on. It's the same old as it was in the earlier chapters. We have Alphonse take hits, we have Fjorm take ranged hits, and we just keep going from there. Nothing really too crazy, but the amount of range units keeps going up and up. So, for example, there was this one map with Kaze and like 2 other daggers and like a mage. And I figured, okay, well, I could just plonk Fjorm, it's not really too bad there. And I could pretty much do that. I had the same mindset going into this next part because all the foes were physical and would only target Alphonse's defense, so I figured he could take every single hit, but no, he can't take a Hinoka. So I had to have Fjorm take her out, and then everything else fell into place. But I just keep going, ranged hits, dragons, Fjorm's tanking all of it. Alphonse is taking the green unit because that's what he's good at. And we just keep going. We just keep going. There's nothing that's really challenging us at the moment. The biggest challenge that we had was, in fact, the Chapter 7 Part 5 map because of the fact that there were reinforcements in the trees that were blocking everything, so it was harder to move around. But we do get to some of the chapters where LENE gets introduced, so she's able to refresh her allies, which makes it a bit more difficult to just plonk and wall because foes can just walk around. So what I had to do here was just have Alphonse tank from the left side and Fjorm from the right side. I figured I could do the same thing here, so I was like, okay, let me just plonk Fjorm. But that didn't work, because obviously she can't take a Hellbindi. It's at least 2 Hellbindi hits, that's a problem on its own. But eventually I was able to take down LENE by baiting her out, and Alphonse was able to finish off there. Fjorm could continue tanking on the right side in the later chapters. She could take out the mages. She could take a couple of physical hits because her bulk is really, really good. So, nothing too challenging there. Nino's map does kind of fall apart when you just plonk Fjorm because she's able to just soak all the damage. It actually becomes quite a bit challenging on the next Surtur map, which does have a lot of ranged units, but there are other reinforcements from the Black Fang, which can be difficult because they show up after the first turn, meaning that if you didn't take out whatever was at the top, they're going to be coming for you. So Ursula is actually going to be posing quite a threat. I just had to build a wall around Linus and Lloyd and Jafar in hopes that they just couldn't pierce through, which they couldn't, which was nice because then I was able to take out Lloyd and Linus. Jafar was able to chip down Anna, but he couldn't kill, so that was whatever. And I was able to pretty much just finish him off. And I could just have Alphonse tank Surtur because he can't pierce through triple brazen defense, which allowed us to keep going, actually. And then we get to Chapter 11, which had another clear condition of clearing everything within 4 turns, which was a bit more difficult than the Levitain one because of the fact that these units don't move and they're a lot more separated. Fjorm can only go on so many sides, so I had her go to the right side in hopes that she could just take out all the ranged threats and chip down the Armor Knight before time runs out, while having Shirena go to the top, baiting out the Mage and the Axe, which does work out because after that point, I was able to just whittle them down with Alphonse, Anna, and Shirena. And then we could just keep going from there. More physical hit tanking with Alphonse and Shirena. More range tanking with Fjorm. Nothing really too crazy. There was another dancer on one of the later parts, and I figured Fjorm could just tank it because she's bulky, but she took 2 hits from a Libra, which was not good. And after that point, she really just couldn't take any hits. She even died to performing Olivia, but we were still able to clear it. But then, we get to Chapter 11, Part 5, which was actually really, really difficult. I figured Fjorm can pretty much just tank everything because the colors are on her side. Maribel does some like crazy effect that allows Levitain to just output a really crazy amount of damage, which I did not understand how this works, and I still don't understand it, in fact. But I figured, okay, we can bait out Maribel, we can take her out. Levitain still doubles Alphonse. His bulk isn't good enough without the Brazens, which is a problem. So I figured we could just keep going. Shirena could probably take hits, maybe, I don't know. She was able to, thankfully, take down Levitain, and Anna was able to take down Sumia. But then we got to the final turn, and I'm like, okay, this is the home stretch. We could just kill Libra and then kill Leguiarn. But Fjorm misses the kill by 1 point. And I was like, fuck. Okay, I have to redo this chapter. And I figured, okay, let's try something else. I can pretty much just keep going. I could just go full force in, bait out Maribel with Sharena, keep doing damage with Fjorm, kill Leviathan with a bonfire, and that does work out after a bit. And then Alphonse was able to just finish off Libra, and that was pretty much part 5 there. The next chapter was really easy, all things considered, because of the fact that Fjorm could just... There's one spot in like 2 of the maps that Fjorm could just sit at and just take out all of the foes, which was really, really convenient. So I didn't really struggle on that end. Quan cannot double for the life of him, so Fjorm is able to just charge up her special again and again and output a fair amount of damage. Even though he is quite bulky on the physical side, it didn't matter because she was able to double. And that was pretty much it for like the first 2 parts. After that, it was just more tanking, Alphonse eating hits from Jump in hopes that he could charge up his Brazens, which he does. And then Alphonse can just take out Jump, and then, you know, it just keeps going from there. There was another Dancer with Sylvia, which actually wasn't too bad, because even though Anna does have Triangle Depth, she was able to take a hit from Sylvia because she has no attack, which made it convenient because she was able to eat all the blue hits, which was really nice. And then the same thing could happen on the next part, where Fjorm could just body block Loki in a Lance Cab, Alphonse can tank the right side with the Sword Flyer, and then when Moon comes down, he could just take him out with 1 hit because Alphonse ends up having a lot of attack. And we just keep going from there to the point where we are able to just clear the map, even with the reinforcements with Quan, Ethlyn, and Jump. It really wasn't too bad because Fjorm is pretty bulky. And then we get to the final chapter, where it's just another game of just body blocking as much as possible and then charging up Brazens, dealing damage. Really wasn't too bad. There's also a bunch of range units for Fjorm to take out. There's like 3 bows or like 2 bows and the mage. For the 2 parts following, there's just a bunch of ranged units, which really does not pose an issue. And then we could just keep going from here until we reach the final chapter, which, you know what? Honestly, also wasn't too bad. The last one in Book 1 wasn't even bad either, but comparatively it wasn't really as difficult, if less difficult. Basically, I could still body block with a lot of these units. Alphonse still has no res, so I had to get him out of the way with the mage, but Anna does have an okay res stat, and even with Triangle Depth, she is able to tank the red mage. But it's at this point where I'm just trying for style points, because I wanted Surtur to be the last kill, but I really couldn't do that because he was approaching Sharena and Fjorm, so what I had to do was just take him out with Alphonse. And after that, just take out the bow unit with Fjorm. And that's all of Book 2, with the Askr trio and Fjorm. Granted, a lot of this book was hard carried by Fjorm, but with the increased amount of ranged units, it would have been more difficult to have Alphonse and Sharena and Anna take on all of those units, especially through multiple combats, because what Fjorm has over the other ones is that she's able to have her Ice Mirror Shield Pulse gimmick going on, which means her damage output isn't even suffering, and she's able to eat a lot of hits. But even then, they were still doing their fair share of work. Even Anna with Lancebreaker and Triangle Depth, she was able to do some stuff. But the fact that you are able to just bring the Askr trio with Fjorm and clear Book 2 means that, yeah, it's pretty clearable. Granted, Fjorm is probably going to be doing most of the work, but you can still do it. I imagine the later books are going to get harder, because honestly, compared to Book 1, I didn't have as much of a hard time here, mainly because some of the Book 1 maps are kind of bullshit, but outside of that, it really wasn't too bad overall. But yeah, I'm pretty much just rambling at this point. If you want to see more books covered, or any sort of like abyssals, or like anything more with the Askr trio cleared, let me know down below. Make sure to like and subscribe, and until next time, I'll see you later.